before you judge her. Pause, because what I'm about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about why a woman cheats. Most people think betrayal happens in a single moment, but the truth is far darker, far quieter, and far more heartbreaking. Behind every unreturned call, every sudden change in her tone, every unexplained distance, there is a story she's not telling you, a story she's been carrying alone, and tonight you're going to hear it. If you've ever wanted to understand what really pushes a woman across that invisible line, stay right here, because once you know these three things, you will never look at love, loyalty, or commitment the same way again. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful insights. When a woman begins to drift emotionally, it rarely arrives with noise. It doesn't show up as a dramatic announcement or a sudden declaration that something is wrong. Instead, it begins quietly. Subtle shifts in energy, moments where her eyes no longer meet yours with the same spark. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now becoming shallow or rushed. Emotional withdrawal is the earliest indicator of infidelity, not because she wants to betray you, but because she has already begun disconnecting from the relationship long before any physical action ever takes place. And if you listen closely, the signs are always there. They whisper before they scream. This emotional retreat often stems from needs going unmet. Needs she may not even know how to articulate. Maybe she feels unheard, unseen, slower, or unappreciated. Maybe the small acts of connection that once held the relationship together have slowly faded. And what happens in that silence is profound. She starts seeking emotional resonance elsewhere, even if she doesn't intend to. Humans don't cheat because they are evil. They cheat because they are responding to a void, a longing, a hunger for connection that has been slowly starving inside them. You'll notice she stops sharing her inner world with you. The story she used to tell you first, she now keeps to herself. The emotions she once trusted you with become locked behind a door she no longer gives you the key to. She might smile, but it lacks warmth. She might talk, but the vulnerability is gone. When she withdraws emotionally, she's not just pulling back from you. She's pulling back from the version of herself she was with you. At first you might mistake it for stress, busy schedules, fatigue, a rough week. But emotional withdrawal doesn't fluctuate. It becomes a pattern. Intimacy, emotional intimacy, begins to feel like work instead of connection. She stops asking you about your day with genuine interest. She stops sharing her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. And over time, the emotional distance hardens into emotional detachment. This detachment is what makes cheating possible. Contrary to popular belief, cheating rarely begins with lust. It begins with loneliness. It begins with the desire to feel alive again, to feel valued, to feel wanted, to feel understood. When she no longer feels emotionally nourished in the relationship, she becomes vulnerable to anyone who offers her the emotional oxygen she's been missing. And when she finds even a small sense of that connection outside the relationship, someone who listens, someone who notices, someone who makes her feel something, her heart begins to shift, even if her body hasn't. You'll see it in the way she communicates. Her messages become shorter. Her tone becomes neutral. The softness in her voice fades. Arguments become more frequent, not because she wants to fight, but because emotional disconnection builds internal tension. Everything you say feels like it brushes against something sensitive. Everything she says feels defensive. And yet, beneath all of that, there is a deep fear. A fear that the relationship has lost the emotional foundation it once had. When a woman begins investing emotionally elsewhere, she becomes more protective of herself. She stops letting you into her deeper layers. She stops discussing solutions. She avoids difficult conversations. And if you try to fix things, she may appear uninterested. Not because she doesn't want resolution, but because her heart is no longer anchored in the relationship the way it once was. But emotional withdrawal is not always intentional. Sometimes she wishes she could reconnect. Sometimes she wishes you would notice. Sometimes she is silently begging for you to see her slipping away. But many men don't see it until it's too late. Not because they don't care, but because they misinterpret emotional distance as attitude, mood swings, or temporary stress, not realizing it's a sign that the relationship's emotional threads are unraveling. This is why emotional connection must be nurtured consistently. It's not something you build once and keep forever. It is a living, breathing exchange that requires presence, attention, and empathy. When those elements fade, emotional withdrawal begins filling the space between two people like fog. Quiet, invisible at first, then eventually impossible to ignore. And here's the truth most people avoid. Cheating doesn't start in the bedroom. It starts in the heart. Physical betrayal is the final step in a long chain of emotional exits. If you want to prevent infidelity, you must learn to recognize disconnection the moment it begins. Understand her emotional language. Listen when she speaks, especially when she speaks through silence. Notice when her laughter changes, when her energy shifts, when her presence feels distant, even while she's sitting right beside you. The earlier you see emotional withdrawal, the earlier you can rebuild emotional closeness, because emotional distance doesn't have to end a relationship. It only does when it goes unnoticed or unaddressed. And so, if there is one message you take from this, let it be this. Pay attention to the emotional temperature of your relationship, because the heart always leaves long before the body ever does. When a woman starts creating new private spaces in her life, it is almost never random. People don't suddenly become secretive without a reason. Privacy in a healthy relationship is normal. Everyone deserves their own inner world. But secrecy is different. Secrecy is the quiet construction of walls, the invisible shifting of boundaries, so you subtle reorganization of her life, so you no longer have acts the partly she once openly shared. And that shift often marks the beginning of emotional reorientation, where her attention, her curiosity, her emotional investment start leaning towards someone else. She doesn't announce this change. She doesn't tell you she needs more privacy or that she's carving out new space for herself. Instead, it emerges through tiny behavioral cues. She becomes protective of her phone. She tilts the screen away while texting. She pauses a conversation when you enter the room. She tells you, "It's nothing," even when the energy in the room says otherwise. It's easy to overlook these signs or dismiss them as overthinking. But in reality, these private pockets she's forming are not accidental. They're strategic. They allow her to control what you see, what you hear, and what you know. This shift is psychological. When someone begins engaging emotionally with another person, they develop a heightened need to protect that connection. They guard it, nurture it, and shield it from anything that might expose or threaten it, including the Solotav might logger, Nestor including that their partner. This is why secrecy becomes a natural extension of emotional infidelity, long before any physical line is ever crossed. It's not about hiding a person. It's about hiding a version of herself she doesn't want you to question. You might notice her schedule changing. Suddenly, she's busy, exhausted, or tied up with work. She spends more time alone or with friends you never teach about. She steps outside to take calls. She stays late for reasons that feel increasingly central and central fill of the vague. And when you ask, even gently, she becomes defensive. Not because she's guilty in a malicious way, but because she feels exposed. She knows the truth hasn't fully taken form yet, but the emotional boundary has already shifted. She's protecting a world she is not ready to explain. New hobbies begin appearing. New routines. new places she wants to go alone. And while independence is healthy, what you're witnessing is not independence. It's selective withdrawal. These new pockets of life don't include you because they're not designed to. They are safe spaces where she can explore new emotional connections without the weight of accountability. When someone begins to emotionally detach from a partner, they start reorganizing their life in a way that supports the emotional distance. Privacy becomes the architecture that holds that distance together. You'll feel something changing, even if you can't articulate it. Conversations that once included every detail now feel filtered. She gives you summaries instead of stories. She no longer shares spontaneous moments. The transparency that once created trust begins to blur, and in its place grows a quiet uncertainty. That uncertainty is not your imagination. It is the emotional residue of secrecy. From a psychological standpoint, secrecy serves two purposes. First, it protects the connection she's forming outside the relationship. Second, it protects her from confronting her own choices. It's easier to hide than to explain, easier to avoid than to admit, easier to create distance than to face the emotional conflict happening within her. These private spaces give her room to rationalize, to justify, to test the limits of how far she's willing to go. And yet, even in this shift, there is often confusion inside her. She doesn't always know what she wants. She may feel torn, guilty, or uncertain. The secrecy becomes a way of managing her internal conflict. She isn't fully committed to leaving, but she's no longer fully present in the relationship either. So she creates a buffer, a space where she can breathe without accountability, a space where the emotional pull from someone new can grow without interruption. This is why secrecy is so dangerous. Not because of what is happening inside the private space, but because of what it symbolizes. The emotional exit has begun. And once a woman starts emotionally protecting someone else more than she protects the relationship, the connection she has with her partner becomes vulnerable. Trust weakens. Communication loses its depth. The emotional bond begins to fracture. But here's the deeper truth. Secrecy isn't always about betrayal. It's often about unmet emotional needs. When she feels disconnected, unheard, or undervalued, she becomes more receptive to connection elsewhere. The private spaces she creates reflect the emotional spaces she feels are missing. And while this doesn't justify the secrecy, it explains the psychology behind it. Humans seek connection where they feel alive. They protect whatever gives them that sense of emotional recognition. So if you start noticing new secrets, new distances, new boundaries she didn't need before, don't overlook them. They are signals, not of her being mysterious, but of her being emotionally elsewhere. They are signs that there is a part of her world she no longer feels comfortable sharing with you. And emotional transparency is the foundation of any real relationship. Once secrecy replaces transparency, the relationship begins to weaken at its core. And the message in all of this is simple. Pay attention to the spaces she builds, because the places she hides reveal exactly where her heart is going. When a woman begins shifting her energy, her appearance, and her priorities, it is almost never random. Human beings don't transform themselves in meaningful ways without an internal catalyst. And when that catalyst involves someone new, someone who is feeding her emotionally, intellectually, or even subtly validating her, her outer world begins reflecting the change happening inside her. This is why one of the strongest indicators that a woman is either considering cheating or already emotionally involved with someone else is the noticeable shift in how she presents herself. It starts with energy. Her energy becomes lighter or more self-focused. She seems distant in certain moments, but unusually vibrant in others. She becomes inconsistent, almost unpredictable in the way she shows up emotionally. One day she seems indifferent, the next she's glowing with a kind of confidence that hasn't been rooted in your relationship for a long time. And the reason is simple: she is receiving stimulation, mental or emotional, from a source other than you. It doesn't matter whether it's flirtation, attention, or admiration, that new input begins shaping her inner world. And inner worlds always spill into the outer world. This is why you'll often see changes in appearance. Humans naturally elevate their presentation for the environments, people, or experiences that excite them. When she starts fixing her hair differently, wearing clothes she hasn't worn in years, putting extra effort into makeup, or paying attention to details she previously didn't care about, it's not superficial. It's symbolic. It's a sign that she is stepping into a version of herself she wants to be seen in. She is aligning herself with a different emotional identity. And when that shift isn't shared with you, when she's not dressing up for the relationship, it becomes a red flag. Not because change is wrong, but because the motivation behind the change matters. But the deeper shift isn't external, it's in her priorities. You'll notice she becomes selective with her time and energy. The things that once mattered, quality time, shared routines, couple rituals, slowly move down her list. She may become impatient, irritable, or easily annoyed by things she previously let slide. She stops seeking your approval, not because she's strong and independent, but because her validation is being sourced elsewhere. The emotional currency that once flowed toward the relationship is now being redistributed. And perhaps the most telling sign is the change in how she responds to your affection. When a woman's heart is invested elsewhere, even subtly, your attempts at closeness feel intrusive to her. What used to be comforting now feels heavy. What used to make her smile now feels like pressure. You'll feel her pulling away, even while she remains physically present. She may still go through the motions, but her presence is muted. She is not with you, she is near you, and that difference is profound. Psychologically, this shift is rooted in identity realignment. When someone begins forming an emotional or romantic connection outside their relationship, they don't just change how they act, they change who they are. Their self-perception shifts, their desires shift, their emotional orientation shifts. And because humans are expressive beings, those internal movements naturally reveal themselves through behavior, style, body language, and decision making. There is also an element of contrast. When a woman begins investing in someone new, she starts comparing the two connections. Consciously or unconsciously, she weighs how she feels in your presence versus how she feels in theirs. Even the smallest gestures from the new person can create an emotional contrast that changes the rhythm of how she interacts with you. You might notice less enthusiasm, less softness, less openness. The comparison may not be fair or even accurate, but emotional comparisons rarely are. They are driven by feeling, not logic. And this is where many people misunderstand cheating. They think infidelity is a moment of temptation or weakness. But in reality, infidelity is often the outcome of internal transformation, a shift in identity, a shift in desire, a shift in emotional resonance. When a woman changes her energy, appearance, and priorities, she is signaling that something within her has already crossed a threshold. She is beginning to detach from the version of herself she was in the relationship and stepping toward a new emotional reality. But as much as these changes may hurt to witness, they are also invaluable indicators. They reveal that something is deeply misaligned, and that ignoring these shifts only accelerates the emotional distance. The goal isn't to control her transformation, it's to understand its cause, to communicate, to reflect, to reconnect before the identity shift becomes irreversible. Because once someone's sense of self changes, once they see themselves differently, it becomes almost impossible to return to who they were before. And relationships don't survive identity fractures unless both partners are aware of them and willing to rebuild. So if you see her changing, if you feel the energy shift, if you notice the new glow, the new distance, the new priorities, don't dismiss it. Pay attention. Ask questions, not with accusation, but with clarity, not with fear, but with presence. Because ignoring the shift won't stop it, understanding it might. And remember this, a change in her energy is never just a phase, it's a message. Listen before it becomes goodbye.